Okay, so this is the new series on tarot reading, part 2. So in the first video, in the last one, I made the point about looking at what a card involves, right? What it's about, rather than what it means. And then you speak to the questioner based on what the card involves, right? So you know what to say and how to say it. And in the last video, I used the example of the Four of Cups, right? The fellow sitting with his back against a tree. And that can mean that the card involves thinking and imagining and pondering. So what the card means should relate in some way to that type of human behavior, right? So you can be building a business or trying to build a business empire. And that involves a lot of actions and different people and activities, right? The actual building of the empire. But with the Four of Cups, it's as if you're still in the planning stages, thinking about it and thinking it through. So get that sorted out first. And at the time that I did the first video, I had in mind a couple of follow-up points, and I was going to do them in this one, but I think I'm going to end up talking too long. So there's going to be one point in this video, and there'll be a third one with the second point. So the first point is this. Let's say you pick up a newspaper and you start to read it. Okay, you follow the stories, but you do not use your intuition. Okay, you read the text and you follow along and you understand to some extent, or well, you understand what's going on. And this makes me wonder, what if we read the tarot the same way? I mean, if we just see and describe what's there in the card, in the picture, and then we pass on this information to the questioner. And we're not depending on psychic impressions and intuition to give us information or details. And this can be good, partly because psychic impressions can be misleading or just wrong. So what you try is you pick a card and you describe what you see, and then you relate that information to the question in order to produce an answer. So let's say the question is, somebody wants to know, am I going to get this particular job? You shuffle and you pick and you get the Three of Swords, and that's the answer. So we show it to the questioner, who can then see what we see. Okay, we're looking at the same picture, and they can follow along with what our interpretation is. So the card shows a heart, and the heart can represent enthusiasm, right? My heart was in it. Or I didn't have the heart to tell him. So it can also show courage or lack of courage. So the heart can be enthusiasm or love, right? But the Three Swords through it, so it looks like disappointment. Heart pierced with swords, or sorrow. So if you really want the job, it looks like you're going to be disappointed. So the answer is no. You're not going to get this job right now. And we're saying that you're not going to get this job right now, because that's what the question was. We're not going to expand upon it and talk about problems and take that idea of disappointment and sort of run with it, because that's not what the question was. The question was, am I going to get this job now? So we obey the questioner and answer the question. So this Three of Swords coming up doesn't mean you're never going to get a job that you want. But if you look at this Three of Swords, it looks like this one you're going for, or that you want, isn't right for you in some way, or you aren't right for it. And because the card shows a heart, which seems to kind of involve other people, then it could be that there's a warning, or you're being told that you wouldn't get along well with the people you'd have to work with, right? Three of Swords. Or there would be too much arguing at the workplace, and you wouldn't like it. Sometimes you don't mind arguing, but in this case, either the people doing the arguing, or what's being said, or how it's being delivered, you wouldn't like that. Or maybe it's an indication that the boss with the sword, an instrument, a dangerous instrument, and the heart, maybe it's an indication that the boss would be a tyrant or a bully, or somebody who likes to hurt other people, and that wouldn't suit you. Right, so we're giving you an answer. No, you're not going to get the job. And we're talking about why or why not, and what this could mean. just so you've got a better, so the questioner has a better understanding of what's involved with that particular question. So they say, okay, you tell them you're not going to get this job, and they say, okay, let me have a follow-up. Where do I look for the right job? Which is a fair enough question. So when you're shuffling, let's say you get the Knight of Batons. And again, we're thinking about what the card involves. Now, the question was, where do I look for a job? Right? So you don't look at the card and think, okay, I don't know what a knight means. You look at the picture and you've got a horse, a fellow on a horse. So maybe you think, okay, it could be a racetrack. So you go to a racetrack and apply for a job there. The thing is, I'm just outside Toronto, and when I take the train to go and look after my grandson, we pass a racetrack on the way, and maybe that's why when I look at that, for the moment, when I looked at that particular card right now, that's maybe why I thought of a racetrack. But even if there's no racetrack in your town, we're thinking about, or we're trying to think about what's involved with the picture. So think about racetracks. There's activity every day, but it's like the main point or the important point is the day of the race meeting. That seems most important. So it's like there's regular work and regular involvement, but there's an event that repeats itself because you'll have, let's say, you have one race meeting every 2 weeks, but it's not that the event takes place every day, right? So where do you look for a job? Where do you look for the right job? Somewhere where there's backroom activity going on all the time, but there's a public or an open event that happens periodically. And that's where you look for a job. And the thing is, you say that can ring a bell in the questioner's mind. And they've got an idea of what you're getting at, even if you don't. If you can't say, okay, this particular location, you don't need, the reader doesn't need to know that, I think, because the question is going to put it together based on the kinds of information that you give them. So it happens to be September, and the Toronto International Film Festival is on right now, and that's quite an important film festival. And the thing is, some people work in it all year round, but now in the first 2 weeks in September, that's when it all comes together. So if this were a real situation and you were asking me this question right now, I might say to you, I might suggest, go and take a look and apply somewhere where you become involved in behind the scenes activity or work for a public event or an occasional event. So we've got the idea of a racetrack, but we're not stopping with just a racetrack. We're understanding what's involved in a racetrack and then describing or painting a picture that the questioner can relate to and making a sort of wider application or a wider description of that particular set of circumstances that would be part of the answer. So if we look at the picture again, this horse seems to be about to gallop off, but it may be pulling up and stopping, right? Because the knight's legs are straight down. So either way, there's fast movement, but is it the start or the finish? So if we have to know which it is, then that's where we have to trust. But that whole idea of trust and how we use it, that's the subject of that was going to be the second point, but it's going to have a video to itself, and that'll be coming up next. So as I look at this Knight of Batons, I normally look at it and I tend to think, it looks to me like the person's getting ready to move. So I might suggest that the questioner goes to maybe a temp agency or someplace where they can get employment, right? So they try different activities to see what they like. Because the question was, where do I look? And so the answer is, I think, partly from this particular card, go to a temp agency. This may not seem like much, but I think it's important to remember that the questioner doesn't always get to the end in one step, right? You ask a question, but there isn't always one simple, do this and immediately you're there. So if you go to a temp agency, for example, and you follow through with different work and meet new people and discover what you enjoy doing, then you can find satisfaction and a new job, even if you don't know right now what it is that you want to do. Or even if, because it may be that you need to meet a few people and have a few experiences before you get to the point where you're going to find the job that you want. And the thing is, if the reader, let's say somebody wants to know where do I find a job, if the reader tells you the truth, you might be quite far from seeing that truth, that you don't take it serious, you don't take seriously what you're told. So even though we might think we want to know the final outcome, there can be many good reasons for not knowing it or for not being given answers before their time. Because sometimes we need to go through various experiences so we can appreciate what we've got. And I'm making this point so that you, the reader watching this, that even if you aren't a great psychic master, and if you don't have great intuitive sense, that can be really good, because you can be a great tarot reader. And maybe you can be more useful to questioners because you're not being psychic. So what the reader says in a reading, it may be only step one for the questioner, but that's good because it leads to the correct outcome. So another point with this particular knight is that in the tarot, knights are messengers. Some people say pages are messengers, but they're not. So anyway, you may be the reader, right? And you see this knight and you say, okay, a knight's a messenger. Remember, you're just reading the newspaper article and you don't have to know the details or the connections that the questioner is making, right? So you may say messenger and the questioner says, could that be the taxi office round the corner? I sometimes wonder about asking for a job there, right? So you say messenger. You don't have to know or say taxi office or delivery driver or selling advertising or some other message or messenger system. You give the questioner a picture of, not quite sure how to say this, a picture of the dynamics or the energy of the answer, the different component parts of the answer. And he or she is going to put it together. Maybe not always at the moment that you say it, but the picture that you're going to put a picture in their mind and they're going to get it later. So the reader, I think, is kind of pointing the questioner in the right direction. And this is good because it means the questioner knows they're living their own life or their life their own way, right? They're doing what has to be done and they've got some say in what happens and they're not just a pawn in somebody else's game. And that can be very liberating. Because let's say you go to somebody and you say, am I going to meet somebody? And they say, yes. His name is George and he's 5'11" and he's got dark hair and he was born on this date. That's all very impressive if it happens. But, you then have to wonder if this is all mapped out for me in this detail and there's nothing I can do about it, why am I even living? But if the questioner paints a picture and talks about messengers or racetracks and regular but not daily events, then the questioner can put it together and come up with a complete answer. So one last point for now. If you look at cards this way, like a newspaper report or an article and you just read it, then if you've got, let's say, a 3-card past, present and future spread, then we can say to ourselves, we as readers can say to ourselves and make sense of the reading by thinking, okay, the first card shows yesterday's newspaper, right? It's old news. The middle card shows today's newspaper. And I love this next bit. The third card shows tomorrow's news today. So when we look at the first card, we know we're describing an old newspaper, right? So what it shows may be out of date or no longer in effect, though it could still be relevant. So we keep that in mind when looking at today's newspaper, so to speak, the present card, and the same for the future. Okay, that was point one. in connection with, or the follow-up point in connection with the idea in the last video about seeing what a card involves and then expanding on those ideas. So we examine cards and read them as if they were written by somebody else, as if it was a newspaper story written by somebody else. And we don't have to include our own views on the subject that has been written about. We're just reporting what's there. That's point one. Point two is going to be about trust, and that's next. Thank you very much.